What's going on, guys? RvzStealth here, and in today's video, I'm going to be giving you guys my opinion on the best mid laners for patch 6.1. So first up is going to be Zed. Now, if you guys have been following my channel for a while now, you probably know that I'm not a huge fan of Zed, but right now, he's got such a high win rate for the play rate that he has, and even though he does fall off in the late game and he does have quite a few counters, if you can play Zed correctly right now and you can take advantage of his strong early to mid game, then you can do really well on him for sure. I would say that if you haven't played him a lot, then don't just jump right into ranked with him. Definitely practice him in normal games before playing him in ranked, but he is a very strong champion if you do know how to play him correctly. So he's great with the new masteries. Thunderlords and the Assassin mastery just synergize really well with him, and if he does get ahead, he can start split pushing and he can just start 1v1ing pretty much any other champion in the game if he does end up getting ahead. He's got good mobility as well, so it's really hard to gank a Zed, and it just allows him to stay really safe in team fights, and it allows him to jump on his target really easily. He also does have pretty good wave clear with his W and his Q, and he is one of the stronger roaming champions in the game due to his gap closer with his W as well as his ultimate. A few cons to Zed though are that he does have a weaker late game compared to a lot of the other mid laners, since once you get to the 30 to 35 minute point, the enemies are probably going to have a Zhonya's and a Quicksilver Sash by then, so it just makes it really hard for you to find that target to assassinate, and in my opinion, he is harder to play. He also does have quite a few easy counters, so unless you're a really good Zed player, I wouldn't blind pick him. Lissandra and any champion that does end up building a Zhonya's or can rush a Zhonya's can do really well against Zed once it does get past the laning phase. Next up on my list, I have Ahri. So Ahri has stayed a consistently strong pick for solo queue for quite some time now. I don't think I can remember back to when I didn't have Ahri on one of my top 5s, and that's just because her kit is so rewarding and it's just so good for solo queue. She's got insane mobility with her Q and with her ultimate, so that just enables her to be really safe in the laning phase. Once she does hit level 6, she can look for roams really easily because of her strong mobility. Once you do it 6 as Ahri, then make sure you pay attention to your minimap. If the enemy bot lane is pushing out, then look to go for a roam down there, because as long as you can hit your charm, you're basically guaranteed to pick up a kill whenever you do roam as Ahri. She also does have pretty good wave clear with her Q and her W. She's one of the safer mid laners in the game too, due to if she is in a harder matchup, she can just sit back and farm with her Q. Her level 6 all in is one of the better ones in the game if you can hit your charm. Once you do it 6 as Ahri, as long as you can hit your charm, then you should be able to 100-0 your opponent if you do run Ignite. Her sustain in the laning phase is also quite good with her passive, and she does have that true damage coming back on her Q, so that's also a really nice part of her kit. And one con to Ahri though is that she is a very skill shot reliant champion with her Q and with her E, so if you can't land those abilities, then she isn't going to be the most rewarding pick in the game for you. Next on my list, I have Twisted Fate. So the main reason why TF is so strong for solo queue is due to his ultimate. So once you do it 6 as TF, always look to use your ultimate. You should be using it on cooldown. What I mean by that is whenever it's up, just always be looking for the opportunity to use it, because it can just end up snowballing the game really hard. If you can just get a good ultimate down bot lane, end up picking up a double kill, then you've pretty much won the game right there as long as you play smart. He also does have his 2-second point and click stun with his gold card, so that's just really easy to hit in team fights. As long as you have a general idea of what you're doing on TF, you should be able to get a few of those off in a team fight because it is on a very short cooldown. He also does have some pretty good wave clear with his red card and his Q. He is one of the better tower pushers in the game due to his blue card, and he is a pretty safe laner as well. If he is in a harder matchup, then he can just end up sitting back and farming with his Q. He does have one-shot potential late game if he can get his 3 stacks on his E, and then he hits a blue card or he hits a gold card, and then he hits his Q, then he can one-shot squishies once he does get to the 30 to 35 minute point in the game. A few cons to TF though is that he does not have a gap closer or a dash, so you do have to be careful in the laning phase about your positioning as well as in team fights, and in my opinion, he is also a bit harder to play than some of the other mid laners. Next up on my list, I have Talon. So I do like Talon as my go-to assassin right now. I prefer him over Zed and over Fizz just because his burst is more reliable and it doesn't get countered once you do get to the mid to late game. You can't build a Quicksilver Sash against Talon to negate his burst, whereas with Zed and with Fizz, you can build that item and you can take off the Death Mark and take off the Fizz ult. So I just like Talon because he is a little bit more reliable. He also does have a quicker 100-0 than some of the other assassins, since once he jumps on his opponent, uses his ultimate, his W, and his Q, that takes less than a second if you're a good Talon player, whereas if you're playing Zed or Fizz, your 100-0 takes at least 2 seconds. So I like that I like that he does have a bit of a quicker burst combo than those other champions. He does have the gap closer on his E, which just allows him to easily jump on his target and easily assassinate them. The stealth that he does get with his ultimate is pretty underrated as well. When you are playing as Talon, never be afraid to just use your ultimate to get out of a sticky situation. It is on a very short cooldown. It's like a 30-second cooldown if you've got 40% CDR at max rank, so just never be afraid to use your ultimate as Talon. He also does have very good sticking power because he gets the slow on his E as well as his W, and he is one of the better roaming champions in the game as well due to his ultimate as well as his E. And one con to Talon though is that he does have a bit of a weaker early game if you are playing up against a ranged champion or somebody that can poke you out of lane. And to round out my top 5 for this patch, I have Fizz. So I haven't been seeing a whole lot of Fizz right now. I feel that he is pretty underrated. The 40% CDR build that you can get on him though is just absolutely crazy once you do get to mid to late game team fights. He's just so slippery. For example, if you end up building Zhonya's on Fizz and you have 40% CDR, you can use your full burst combo, you can use your E, and then you can go into Zhonya's, and then after you get out of Zhonya's, your E is going to be off cooldown already, so then you can just use that to hop away if you need to, and it just makes him a very hard champion to counter. Is just so hard to do well against Fizz once he does get going and once you do get to those mid to late game team fights. He's got a great level 6 all-in, so make sure that you do take advantage of that, especially if you are playing up against a squishy mage in the laning phase. His mobility is absolutely insane as well with his Q and his E. His E, in my opinion, is just pretty OP. Like, I feel like that ability should be nerfed or it should be put on a longer cooldown because it's just such an easy and rewarding ability, and it doesn't really, you just can't counter it. There's no way to counter Fizz's E, so I think that they do need to nerf that ability some way. He's a very good roaming champion as well just because of his strong mobility and his ultimate, and he does snowball very hard. He is one of the hardest snowballing champions in the game, that's for sure. And one con to Fizz though is that he is a bit weaker in the laning phase against some ranged champions. First up on the honorable mentions, I have Brand. So Brand is still a really good pick for solo queue. He is a little bit weaker against those assassins though that we're seeing lately, so that's why he isn't on my top 5 for this patch. He does still have one of the higher win rates for any mid laner in the game though, and the Leandri Rylai's build on him is still absolutely crazy in those mid to late game team fights, so I would definitely recommend still picking Brand for solo queue if he is not banned. Next up, I have Lux. So Lux definitely has a similar playstyle to Brand. She is kind of like a poke mage, and she is one of the safer mid laners in the game. She can stay back in team fights because of the long range on her Q, her E, and her ultimate. She also does have a very high win rate still, so if you are looking for a control mage who can just sit back in team fights and get a lot of poke damage off, then I would recommend playing Lux. Next on the honorable mentions, I have Vel'Koz. So Vel'Koz is a very strong long-range mage champion. Surprisingly, he's got like the 4th or 5th highest win rate for any mid laner in the game right now, and in my opinion, that's just because he's got a really strong early to mid game, and he also does a ton of AoE damage. Once you do get to team fights as Vel'Koz, if you can get a fully channeled ultimate off on multiple targets, then you can just deal so much AoE damage, and it just makes him a great pick for solo queue in my opinion. Next up, I have Yasuo. So I still think that Yasuo is a pretty strong assassin. I do think that he is a bit weaker than the ones I mentioned on my top 5 though, because if you do get caught out with Yasuo, you're basically dead. Whereas if you're playing one of the champions or one of the assassins on my top 5 like Talon, Zed, and Fizz, if you get caught out with them, you've got an escape on all of those champions. So I think that if you can play Yasuo correctly, you can definitely do really well on him, but I do think he does take more skill than some of the other assassins in the game. Next on the honorable mentions, I have Orianna. So Orianna is a very underrated mid pick. You don't really see her too much for solo queue. You see her quite a bit for competitive, but I do think that she is a very good pick for solo queue. She really does fit into any team comp. She really isn't a bad pick for any situation. She's got a very good laning phase. She's got a very strong mid to late game, and her team fight is also very good. So if you're just unsure of who to pick in a certain situation, then if you pick Ori, you really can't go wrong with that champion. And last but not least, on the honorable mentions for this video, I have Anivia. So Anivia is a really strong control mage. She's got her ultimate, she's got her wall, and she's also got her Q, which just provide really good zoning in team fights. You can just do some really good work once you do get to those mid to late game team fights as Anivia. I do think that she is a bit harder to play than some of the other champions because her ult range did get nerfed, so you do definitely have to go a bit closer now to deal your damage. And I do think that is definitely, it does hurt her a little bit because you do have to really be careful about your positioning in team fights as her, but I think that a good Anivia player can definitely carry pretty hard. So that is all for the video, guys. If you did enjoy, then don't forget to drop a like and subscribe if you have not already. So thanks for watching, guys. Have an awesome day, and I will see you in my next video.